Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees no new releases, as January is typically the month where movies go to die, and also we are in the midst, of course, of the Christmas season continuing on, and also the New Year's celebrations that also continue, so a happy and blessed New Year to everyone, and a continued Merry Christmas. It is still Christmas up until the Feast of the Epiphany, so I will continue to say that here on the channel, but it looks like once again Mufasa, the Lion King, is set to continue on in its doing better than what anyone could have expected, especially after an abysmal opening weekend with another very strong hold here. So whereas we've seen previous weekends where certain films have been able to actually see increases in their numbers, including last weekend where we actually saw an increase for the likes of Wicked and Moana 2, we're actually now seeing very strong holds down the line for several movies, also including, of course, for Sonic the Hedgehog 3, but this does seem to indicate the potential for Mufasa to eventually be able to actually catch up and maybe even surpass the total domestic take of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Now, very early on in the tracking for these two movies, it was initially said that whereas Sonic 3 was going to win the opening weekend, that in the long run, Mufasa would end up winning out in the domestic battle, would have much better legs. Now, this is again because typically films like Mufasa and the power, of course, of the Disney machine is able to really just push theaters to not only have the movies that they release in their more premium formatted screens, but also to have better showtimes and things of that nature, right? There's many things that can obviously lead to that. But obviously the very bad word of mouth on the film itself, many thought that, hey, Mufasa is not looking like it's going to be as good. That's why the tracking actually changed for Mufasa in those early days leading up to the actual release of the movie, where eventually not only did Sonic 3 beat the opening weekend, but also beat the long-term domestic take. That seems to be changing as the film continues to dominate the total number of theaters, right? 4,100 screens versus even Sonic 3's from Paramount's 3,769 screens estimated. So again, it's going to be interesting to see this battle between these two movies, but right now, where Sonic 3 does have the edge in total domestic, Mufasa is definitely not done at this point. Now, I thought that, hey, going into the third weekend of release, we would start to see things change a little bit more because typically, studios, as far as Disney and others have been concerned, usually are able to get contracts so that they have the premium format screens for those first couple of weeks. I'm wondering now if maybe Disney had an extra week since there's no new releases coming out this weekend, if maybe they're holding on to those premium formatted screens, or if now theaters have the choice of whether or not to have Mufasa or Sonic in their premium formatted screens. I have seen some showtimes in my local theaters which have other films other than Mufasa. Normally that does not happen unless that contract between them and Disney has gone away, because again, Disney is very much usually a, hey, if you want to have our movie, you got to have only our film showing in your premium screens for an extended period of time. And so maybe that seems to have been changing, but hey, the numbers don't lie. The numbers are very clear here. And Mufasa is not done. And as I mentioned in last weekend's video, the box office breakdown for this past weekend, not only in the video, but also on the article for geeksandgamers.com, don't rule out Mufasa as potentially being able to actually make its money back, despite the fact that this did not seem possible after its opening weekend. So let's go ahead and just dive into these numbers here. So according to Box Office Theory, we have Mufasa the Lion King at 24.6 million being projected, a 33% decrease from last weekend. So that's the kind of hold that Disney wants to be seeing. That's the kind of hold that most movies of this caliber want to actually be seeing, right? A 33% hold means that, this movie is actually still making about as much as possibly can be expected at this time in a given release. Whereas many films often have massive drop-offs the further that they are out. We see that in the films like Mufasa, even films like Sonic, and also even films like Wicked and Moana 2, very strong holds from week to week to week, which shows us, right, audiences coming back for return visits, but also newer audiences finally coming to the theater for the first time. And so these are numbers that just cannot be downplayed and cannot be ignored. I have my own opinions on Mufasa as a gosh awful film, as a complete garbage tier level movie as far as the narrative is concerned, as far as just how unnecessary it is in the grand scheme of the entire history of Lion King and the Disney company. But hey, numbers are what they are, and no matter my thoughts about that movie, we cannot deny the fact that it's actually doing a lot better than it has any right to, and has doing a lot better than anyone could have possibly have expected. And we still, of course, have not even gotten the full weekend numbers with the full international numbers, where this movie has been doing a lot better internationally. So having this kind of long life in the domestic marketplace is going to be a very important sign. Now, whether this film is able to hold on to this audience and is able to hold on to these numbers going into next week, where people are going back to work, back to school, and we typically see that holiday glow that oftentimes can surround movies like this that do better over the holiday frame, whether it can hold on to that or not, and whether Sonic 3 is able to maybe start edging it out there, still remains to be seen. But a $4 million advantage, at least currently being projected. Not everyone agrees with this, by the way, but still, Mufasa is going to be holding strong no matter which way it goes. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 also going to be holding pretty strong here, a 46% drop for this movie. So again, very, very strong numbers here. $20 million being added on. So that means a total for Mufasa being $169.2 million domestic is what's being estimated, and an estimated $187 million for Sonic 3. So again, clearly Sonic has that edge there, but because we're starting to see Mufasa do better in the, not just right now the projected weekend numbers, but also in some of the daily numbers, in the daily battle between these two movies during this holiday frame, shows us that Mufasa does have some staying power. The film Wicked also showing, as I had projected, was probably going to happen over the holiday frame, showing right now some a lot of strength here. A Wicked dropping only 32% from the previous weekend, making another $13.5 million, bringing its total domestic to around $455 million. Now, he also does add here with the 5-day, right, Wednesday through Sunday. This is technically being called the New Year's Day or the New Year's weekend, which seems a bit of a stretch to me, if I'm going to be honest. But still, the numbers are simply what they are. Wicked bring its total domestic to 455. So this film definitely pacing to be able to likely get to over $500 million by everything, by when all is said and done domestically, which is just an impressive feat, no matter how you spin it. Moana 2 also has that potential, though it's obviously not doing as well as Wicked is in the stretch, but still doing well enough to also be in that discussion. Nosferatu, going into its second weekend, is also holding on pretty well here, $11 million. So the film not only being able to break $50 million domestic, which films from Robert Eggers are typically not able to do in the domestic audience, but also has a good chance of profitability, which is also something that Robert Eggers films typically do not have. They usually have a little bit higher budgets than most more independent or smaller, audience type movies are able to do. Like if you look at all the Robert Eggers movies, they're not the biggest box office hits in the world. So the fact that this movie is actually having a more broad appeal, it does make you ask the question of whether this film may have done better in that holiday, that Halloween frame, or if it was the right decision to come out over the Christmas season. Hard to say for sure, but what I can say is that the film is competently done. There's a few things in there that obviously drive me crazy, and I think are a bit, disgusting to be in the movie, again, especially of a sexual nature. Just completely unnecessary crap in there. Obviously, people say, oh, it's a part of the story, it's a part of the history of the character. It's like, I'm sorry, it's like you don't have to show some of those things in there. But the film is still masterfully made, and one cannot deny that fact. So Nosferatu, again, holding very well there. Complete Unknown, dropping only 30%. This is a more independent film, though it's out in a lot of theaters, and so it's not making a ton of money here, but clearly percentage-wise is holding well. Gladiator 2 continues to hold well down the stretch, but just is not going to be able to make its money back. Baby Girl dropping 38%. Everything I've heard about this movie makes me want this movie to fail. Homestead from Angel Studios continuing to hold okay, but just not making a whole lot of money there. And Fire Inside dropping 34%. Again, percentage-wise, Fire Inside, Amazon, MGM Studios films have not had the worst percentage drop-offs, but because they make so little money, it's hard to say that these films have any chance of profitability. Now, going over to Box Office Pro, this is where we do see a bit of a change from the Box Office Theory side of things. As you can see, they actually are projecting currently for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 to win the weekend, with $18 to $22 million being the total, whereas Mufasa is going to be the number 2 film at 16 to 20. So there's enough crossover there as to see why it's going to be a battle right now between these two movies in the stretch. Nosferatu expected to get the number 3 spot here with $10 to $14 million, and so they are actually expecting Nosferatu to hold a little bit stronger than what Box Office Theory is, whereas Box Office Theory has films like Wicked and Moana 2 edging out the second weekend of Nosferatu. Box Office Pro has Nosferatu doing better. I could see with good word of mouth, there's a lot of good word of mouth right now for Nosferatu, that you could potentially see that film creep into that top 3 position. But Wicked and Moana, do not ever rule those two films out either. Going over to Box Office Report, the last of the main box office prognosticator sites, saying here Mufasa is going to win the battle at 24 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at 22.5, and my lights once again just dim whenever I talk about Mufasa or Disney. This is just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But Nosferatu for them, also that number 3 spot there versus Wicked's 12.9 and Moana 2's 12.8. So even they are very clear saying it's going to be a close battle for third place here between these three movies. All of them, though, are doing very, very well no matter which way you try and spin it. Going over the charts because we love Chauncey on OMB Reviews. These are, again, the numbers as being reported by Box Office Mojo, which, again, always take those numbers with a grain of salt. But thenumbers.com was having a lot of issues for a long time, and so here is where we are. As of the last update, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 had made around $234 million worldwide. Just to try to make sure that we are giving a bit of a comparison here to thenumbers.com's reporting. They also have $234 million. But it's also, I think, a good point to bring up here that Sonic the Hedgehog 3's domestic advantage is likely going to be chipped away at certain points, right? And I think that this week is a great example of this very fact. Let's go all the way back to Monday. So as you can see, the difference between Mufasa and Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which had, again, the same exact release date, is showing us that whereas Mufasa lost by about $100,000 or so, even less, on the Monday numbers, and then on the Discount Tuesday, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 also was able to win out only by about, $10,000 or less. On the Wednesday numbers, Mufasa finally took the lead, and by no small measure, $10.3 million versus Sonic the Hedgehog's $8.9 million. And so if it starts to see those kinds of daily numbers, if we get the Thursday numbers in, for instance, and Mufasa still has that type of $2 million advantage, the difference between these two movies is actually not too far off. And so I think that we, again, cannot rule out the fact that Mufasa could end up with a higher domestic total when everything is said and done. Now, again, if you go back in time, this would not have been seen as a weird thing or would not have been seen as unlikely before the opening weekend of Mufasa came out. That was actually what was being projected was, hey, Sonic 3 is going to win the initial battle, but then the war will be won by Mufasa. It's looking like that is now actually going to start playing out. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 still has not made its money back, around $65 million in the red. Keep in mind, though, those international numbers are coming in much more slowly for Sonic, and so I do suspect that by the end of this weekend, when we get the updated internationals and also those domestic numbers, which are still very strong, we'll probably get very close to a break-even point, and this film is definitely set to make a lot of profit when all is said and done. Mufasa right now also is at a position where it's still at $139 million in losses, but if you look at where the movie currently is trending, the film is doing exactly what it wants to be doing. It's doing better in the domestic market down the stretch. And I do think that you're going to see this movie end up, again, having a good chance of getting to $450 million or more. Now, that's not going to be enough to break even if it only gets to that amount of money, but that or more is, I think, a very important, fact to really, pinpoint there. I think that Mufasa has that chance, right? We talked about this with the overall projections. Historically, based on the numbers that we got after those first 2 weeks, right, at $327 million worldwide, it means that right now the projections are between $468 and $655, which means up to an $18 million loss to $93 million gain. Now, that's using a 2.5 multiplier, and so that means that we're likely rather going to see this film be able to make maybe between 10 to 50 million in net profits if it hits that margins. But if it is able to break that historical standard, do better than expected, and right now it seems to be doing that, at least domestically, then we could actually see even more profits for this movie. The fact that profits are even being mentioned with this film after its abysmal opening is something worth mentioning. Now, again, this is based off of a projected total budget of $200 million, a typical $100 million marketing spend. So if the marketing was any more than that, which, again, Disney oftentimes overspends on most things, then that means these numbers are not going to be nearly as good. But the fact that it's even being discussed tells us how really, again, Mufasa is doing better than expected. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, based on those first 2 weeks, remember, these are not really the most reliable because those internationals, right, are a week removed from the rest of the world, right? The internationals are about a week removed, rather, from the domestic market. So projection-wise, it's $300 million to $421 million. But as I'd mentioned, I do think that those numbers are probably on the low side of things, and I would not be surprised to see this film get closer to $500 million worldwide, just because of the fact that it is doing better than the other two films in many different ways. Nosferatu, many people are excited for this movie. $44 million currently in the red. I think that will probably be cut in half by the end of this weekend. So the film doing what it needs to do, I think it's a good chance for this film to be projected to make some profits down the road, not only because audiences are enjoying the film, but also obviously it's getting a lot of awards consideration as well. Whereas films like Baby Girl and The Fire Inside cost a lot less, but I don't think are going to be able to have that type of staying power that they will need to actually be able to break even. So I think we'll probably see some losses there. The last two films to mention, of course, are Moana 2 and also that of Wicked. And so as you can see with Moana 2, $905 million. This film has broken $900 million. This film is still making quite a bit of money down the stretch. So though this movie is definitely not going to be breaking any records anytime soon, $1 billion for this movie is still very much on the table. And this movie right now is profitable, no matter how you spin it. Don't understand why people still cannot quite admit the fact. Again, please show me the numbers that indicate this is not the case, if that is indeed the case. But right now, this film doing better than any of the other, better than the original Moana film. And again, better than has any real right to, because the film is really just not all that good. And then also the film Wicked, close to $650 million. This film, again, well on pace to make over $700 million worldwide, has also been making profits. And again, it's getting very close to doubling what it made after the first 2 weeks. I said that was likely going to happen with the numbers that we were seeing for this movie. And so even though this film is getting a digital release presence, it is still expected to hold strong domestically this weekend. So do not be surprised to see these numbers continue to come in for this movie. The big question for all these films, of course, will be how do they do in that week after people are back at work and back in school? Will they be able to hold? Whereas I think films like Sonic the Hedgehog 3 will be able to hold very strong. Also, I think Mufasa seems to be showing that also as being the case. Films like Moana 2 and also that of Wicked are a bit more of a question mark. More so Moana 2 just because that is going to be that family audience that it's not going to be nearly as available. Whereas for the film Wicked, older audiences are really being brought out. The teenage audience, the young adult audience is really coming out for that movie. And so I do think that could potentially show a longer shelf life for that than a film like Moana 2. We're seeing that already in that daily battle between those two films. And so those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think that we're going to see Sonic the Hedgehog 3 beat out Mufasa? I think Mufasa right now seems to be actually going to be, I think that's going to edge it out. I do. Based on the numbers that we're seeing, I do think that that's probably going to be the end result. I think Mufasa is going to have the higher domestic run. It's obviously going to have, I think, also a higher international run. So I do think that we're going to see Mufasa win out that battle between it and Sonic 3, but that does not mean that Sonic 3 is doing badly or that Sonic 3 will not do well. It'll be interesting to see that battle, though. So what are y'all's thoughts about that? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, loud that fire button over in Aussie, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Friday, and of course, a very blessed and Merry Christmas. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.